Welcome to Valley Mobile Automotive. We're working on a 2008 Subaru Outback 2.5 liter. Just your standard EJ25, nothing crazy. Valve cover gaskets, spark plugs, spark plug wires. A few things to note beforehand is it's super cold out right now where I'm working. So a little tip, if you're working on an engine when it's really cold, start it up, warm it up. Plastics, rubber, don't really like being moved and bent and kinked when they're cold. They can break and snap. So warming the engine up warms up those parts. And then second, that really helps because now you're touching warm engine parts and your hands don't freeze on a cold engine block. All right, let's get cracking.
Oh man, I forgot my camera stand. So this is gonna be a different video than anticipated. I'm just gonna point out what comes off, then take it off, and then point out a few other things, take those off, and then point. So point and remove in this process. So unfortunately, I would have loved to just time lapse everything taking place in succession. But so first thing comes off. This comes off. Typically there's two clips here. That pulls up. Let me just do it because those clips aren't here. So it just slides out. For this air box, there's a 10mm right here. And then down on the side, there's a 10mm. This box comes off, this clip comes off. And before getting too crazy, we'll depressurize the fuel rail. 15 amp fuse, so it's at the bottom of this run here on the right hand side of the fuse box. Pull that out, that's the fuel pump fuse. And then we'll start the car. Make sure, I took the air box out, so make sure your MAF sensor is plugged back in or it won't run very well. Okay, let's start it up and then we'll just wait for it to die. We'll start it up again and wait for it to die a second time. And that should be enough pressure out of the fuel rail. Now that that's depressurized, I'm gonna go ahead and just pull the battery out while we're here. Should be just 10mm holding that strap down and then 10mm on our posts. All right, back onto this side. So the box is all moved out of the way. So we have this, a little bracket here. These 12mm bolts, there's one on the side and I believe there's maybe one in the back. Maybe not, just feel around, you'll see them. Spark plug wires we want to pull off. You can take a picture if you're not sure, or the top one goes to the front. The bottom one goes to the back. Same on this side. PCV hose comes off. All right, now all that's out of the way, and there were 4 bolts holding that on. 2 top ones, a side one, and then a front one. There are 6 bolts. 1, 2, 3 top ones, 3 bottom ones. This front one is for this cover, but it bolts into the valve cover. So that little bolt has to come off there too. The ticket to get the bottom ones is a swiveling ratcheting wrench. Made light work of it, and then I was able to just come in from the top and even get all the way to the back just by reach. So that was me. You know, my arm girth may be different than yours, but I was able to get everything from the top, at least on this passenger side. So this is why the fuel rail needs to be removed or put out of the way, because when you come up, you can only get so far, then the fuel rail gets in the way. And if you remove the fuel rail, you can tilt that valve cover in to clear the cam. So I'm gonna pull this off. At this point, there's just 2 right here and right here, look like 12mm bolts. And then the injectors, you just kind of wiggle them out. This is a metal line, but it connects to a flex line underneath. So you don't have to disconnect the fuel line, just the injectors come out and then you can slough it over and hold it out of the way. All right, we are out completely. You can see these right here was the failure for us. We were getting oil into the spark plug well. The key was to just remove this back, those 2 bolts, move it back, and that allowed us to move all we wanted. Now this electrical harness was over the top with a little zip tie. These are reusable. You could just lift up on this clip in the front and then unzip it, and you can push that harness up and over, and then that way this can move as freely as possible, and you're just wiggling it out and it comes out. Okay, so now it's just a matter of pulling the gasket off, pulling those spark plug well gaskets off, and putting it back on. All right, went ahead and changed out spark plugs while everything was open and easy to get to. Gasket's on, the boots are on, so we're ready to slap this thing back together. Now after setting it back in, I like to just feel with my hands or get a good visual to make sure that that gasket didn't slide out or come out of its groove. So at this point, really, we're just put the 6 bolts back in and tighten those down, and then we can start tightening everything down. Got the valve cover bolted back on. I do not have torque specs, but use your judgment. They're thin bolts, and they go into aluminum, so they don't need to be crazy tight. They're just holding on a valve cover. So that's on. The fuel rail is back in. I recommend some silicone paste on the O-ring for the fuel injector, so those go in nice and good, plugged back in. So at this point, we can put the spark plug wires back on, put their boots in the holes, and just put this whole cover back on. That's pretty much it. Oh, our metal thing, but bolt that down. And this side is complete, then we'll hop over to the other side. All right, everything's put back together. One thing to note when putting the box back on is the location of your connector here. It can fall down by the wheel well pretty easily. You put the box on and then you're like, oh man, gotta take the box back off. So just make sure that that is stuff out of the way. Put the box back on and then your connector is easy to find. That's it. And this side was done. So pretty much everything that needs to come off on this side was the same things that need to come off on that side. We have this cover here, spark plug wires come out of the way, the PCV hose comes out of the way. This cap comes off. Once this cover is off, it exposes 2 10mm bolts to get this off, so that's no big deal. I think that's pretty much it. All right, so I got that cover off from the fuel rail. Getting this front one off is the hardest. There's this connector in the way. I can only get it with a box end wrench, so a couple of turns with the box end, and then you can get it out with your fingers the rest of the way if you do that last. One thing I forgot to mention on the other side is take an air hose and blow out all the top of everything here so that you don't introduce any grit or sand into the top of the valve train when you take the cover off. All right, so getting these bolts off, the 6 bolts for the valve cover, pretty easy, just like the other side. The hardest one is gonna be that back bottom one down there. I had to jack the vehicle up and get it from underneath with a ratcheting wrench. So ratcheting wrench will be your best friend, especially one that can swivel. So I'll get the fuel rail off, just those 2 bolts again. That'll slough over. It had that zip tied just like before. So we'll get that out of the way. Pressure came on right at the right time. So on this side, we had to pull the fuel rail off completely. It just didn't move up enough to get out of the way. So let me see if I can show you. Right there is the connector right here. And you can use an angled pick like this to get to the back side and push in. And then on this side, push in. And that blue piece right here just has to push out. That's the locking mechanism. Pushes out, and then you just kind of wiggle it, and then the line comes completely out. This line here comes out completely. So it's really not that bad. Not the most room, but with a pick, angled pick, you can get it no problem. So now that's out of the way, I think we're ready to pull this for reals. All right, we got it out completely. Removing the fuel rail was the ticket. Came out no problem. One thing to note for this vehicle anyway, is that this injector has been leaking around the O-ring here. So we're getting new seals for that. Local auto parts store supplies them, so good to go. We'll put new seals on before we put our rail back in. Just a note on that far back bottom one is if you have the valve cover bolted on with the other bolts and try to do that one last, it won't go in. So you have to do that one first while everything else is off. Put that one in first while you can wiggle this and stuff to get it in its hole. Otherwise it won't go in. So that's just something to keep in mind, is to put that bottom back one in very first. All right, once that's in, this is on. Now we can go ahead and bolt that up, torque it down. Now I'm waiting on the seals for the fuel rail, but once I get that, put the fuel rail back in, plug it in, and just put everything back together. So getting the fuel rail locked back in isn't too bad, but there's a little technique. So I was able to get, let me grab it, a long screwdriver, and you put it back here, and through, and you can get it underneath that little fuel hose, and that'll prevent that fuel hose from wanting to drop as you're putting this in, and you just kind of wiggle it and get it to drop in. That provides support. I don't know if you could see the tip of it. So that provides support coming in that direction. Then once that's in, to close that little clip, that blue clip, I just use a really long pair of needle nose to get in there, and then you can close it. So I'll put all these tools that I used for this job in the description. Again, it wasn't that bad, it was just a little technique. All right, so that line's back in. I'm gonna bolt down the fuel rail, put the cover back on, put our spark plug, wires, boots on, and the battery. And I believe that buttons up this side. Just real quick, some of the tools I used: an angle pick for the fuel line, long needle nose for the fuel line, flathead screwdrivers for the fuel line. 10mm was really helpful with the valve cover gasket bolts. 12mm used in one place for the that cover over the fuel rail. Used that once. Extension, 10mm, 12mm sockets, electric ratchet, that can be done without that for sure. Silicone paste, and a brake clean. So just a handful of tools, you can get this job done.
All right, there we go. We are complete. Not the most detailed video. Hopefully, though, there was enough information here that can be useful. If nothing else, maybe it can be a source of encouragement. It's not too bad of a job. A couple hours, you can get both sides done. The driver's side is the hardest for two reasons. One, the fuel rail has to come off completely, which still isn't too bad. It's just pulling that blue clip out, and then that rail line comes off, and then that's it. So not much more to do. 1 minute of work. And then that bottom bolt in the back is hard, but you can get that from underneath with a ratcheting wrench. So still not bad of a job. There's not much room to work with when coming off, so you kind of have to twist and wiggle and bend, but it will come off with just a little patience. Anything else? Oh, when putting everything back together, put the fuel pump fuse back in, I like to cycle the key a few times. Run out, look for any fuel leaks, good to go, then I'll crank and start it. Then when it's running, again, I'll go out and just check the fuel injectors for any leaks around those lines. And then again, everything looks good. Just look for, around the valve cover gasket, look for any leaks there, and we should be good to go after that. Take it for a test drive. That passenger side got a little on the exhaust, so it may stink for a day or two while that oil burns off the exhaust. Definitely try to wipe it up the best you can, before starting it up, but it's kind of unavoidable. Anything else? I think that's it. All the tools that I used, I'll kind of post a link down below in the description. It is an affiliate link to an Amazon, products, but if you need them, sweet, click on them. If you don't, don't worry about it, but at least you know what's involved, just some basic tools. All right, well, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. See you on the next one.